Thank you. And I'm going to make you a co-host as well, Dan, so that you can share your screen.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And people will continue to join. Thank you to everybody for joining us online for Yom HaZikaron, which will now very much have begun in Israel, 2 hours ahead of us in time. There are two parts to what we'll be doing together. Dan Kosky, you approached us and said you have thoughts to share. You served as a combat soldier in Nachal Infantry Battalion, the Brigade 50th Battalion from 2003 to 5, and then spent 13 years in reserves. And you said you served in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in every part of Israel's borders. And you're going to talk to us, well, I'll leave you to say what you want to say for about 10, 12 minutes. And then we're going to join. And we tried to create a number of options, but actually we didn't find other things people could join online. So the Parents Circle, who have for a number of years now had a very moving memorial ceremony for Yom HaZikaron, which beginning with a very few people is now followed by many, many thousands, even tens of thousands of shared grief among Israelis, Israeli soldiers, and also Palestinians who've lost close relatives in the conflicts and in the fighting in the region, which we all pray will, please God, come to a peaceful end and conclusion. So we'll invite people to transfer to the link, which has just been put in the chat by Susan just before 6:30. So for now, Dan, over to you, and we'll invite you to be a speaker. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And firstly, can everybody hear me? Just a thumbs up. Yes. Brilliant. Thank you, Rabbi Jonathan, for allowing me to speak. You know, it really is an honor for me to do so. It's for me an incredibly moving day. As you said, I myself served. I made Aliyah in 2003 and decided soon after that I also wanted to contribute to the country's defense, as the majority of Israelis do. I decided the best way for me to do that would be as a combat soldier, much to my mum's delight, as you can imagine. And I ended up in the Nachal Infantry Brigade as a foot soldier. There were 4 infantry brigades at the time, paratroopers, Golani, Givati, and Nachal, and I ended up in Nachal. And after my regular service, I served in the reserves, again as an infantry soldier for 13 years. And during that time, I saw active service in Gaza, in various parts of the West Bank, on all of Israel's borders, and very occasionally just beyond Israel's borders. And I'm immensely proud of my service. I'm immensely proud of it, partly because I see it in the context of Jewish history. You know, we take the state of Israel, the success of the state of Israel very much for granted today. But we don't have to go too far back to grandparents' generations, to great-grandparents, who would have thought such a thing absolutely absurd, unimaginable. You know, our history is one of having been defenseless for thousands of years with devastating consequences. So for me, to have the opportunity to serve in the first independent Jewish army in 2,000 years was an absolute honor. And it remains an absolute honor for me. I'm also very proud that I served in an army, which I believe is an army of values, of real positive values. And I could speak for a long time about that. I won't right now, but suffice to say, I think it's an army which places the value of human life as its supreme value. It's an army that, in my experience, was filled with good people, young people with enormous responsibility upon their soldiers who carry out that responsibility incredibly well. And I was incredibly proud to serve alongside them. For me, Yom HaZikaron, this is my second Yom HaZikaron outside of Israel in the last 20 years. I find it very strange that tomorrow will be a normal day. Tomorrow is just a day like any other here. Obviously, anyone who's ever been in Israel knows the atmosphere in Israel. It's a day when life really stops. People pause. and give a kind of collective embrace to the bereaved families. And it's a day when hopefully everyone comes together, hopefully this year more than perhaps any other year, that everyone actually comes together, unified with the thought and the idea that, of course, there is no Yom Ha'atzmaut without Yom HaZikaron. The 2 days follow each other entirely deliberately. The message is very clear that without the sacrifice that so many have made, there would be no freedom, there would be no self-determination. And overall, the atmosphere, of course, is one of remembrance. I don't think it's an atmosphere of triumphalism at all, or glorification of war. It's one of sadness of the tragedy of war and the tragedy of conflict. And TV screens in Israel tomorrow will be filled with the personal stories of many who have given their lives along the way. And what I wanted to do now is to share with you the personal stories of 2 soldiers that I think of every Yom HaZikaron, and I will continue to think of this evening and tomorrow. So in September 2004, my unit was deployed very suddenly to a major operation in Gaza, Operation Days of Repentance. It was around the time of the Chagim. And rockets had just started being fired from Gaza at Sderot, at the surrounding communities. And the mission was to push the rockets back out of range. So we were deployed in the area of Kfar Darom, an Israeli settlement that, of course, is no longer there, to patrol the area, defend the area. And I remember getting off the bus in Gaza for the very first time and hearing the pretty much constant sound of gunfire. And my immediate thought was there must be an army shooting range here, but there wasn't. That was just life at the time in Gaza, constant gunfire. Every day brought numerous mortar rockets fired at our positions, and every few days there'd be an attempted terrorist infiltration on our positions. And it was against that atmosphere that I found myself one evening. We were a bit short-staffed. It was a major operation, and I was posted to do guard duty from the early hours of the morning until sunrise. And I was posted at the most vulnerable position where we were. And I knew that should there be an attack, I'd probably be the first line of defense. I also knew that would there be an attack, it would probably be on my watch. There was always heavy fog just before dawn. It would be the ideal time to try and infiltrate where we were. So I remember that night very clearly, running through my mind constantly, different scenarios, what my response would be, being as alert as I possibly could and counting the minutes, counting the hours, until eventually the sun came up and I, very relieved, went back and carried out the rest of my duties. Unfortunately, Gilad Fisher was not so lucky. Gilad was a commander in my unit. I didn't know him personally, but he was a commander in my unit, and he was posted 2-3 kilometers down the road in a separate position. He too was on guard duty from the early hours until dawn. An attack was launched under the cover of fog, and Gilad was the first to respond. There was a gun battle, and Gilad was killed, as were the 2 terrorists, but Gilad's actions most certainly saved the lives of some of his friends. I remember as the news came through that Gilad had been killed, I didn't know him personally. Our paths had probably crossed, but he was friends with my commanders. My commanders had been through training with him. My commanders had been through commander's course with him. And I remember we all gathered, and those that knew him said a few words. We lit a candle, and then we went back to our jobs. We went back to our work, because there is no time really in the army to pause, to process, to reflect. There's a job to be done, a mission to be completed, and that's what you do. So 2-3 weeks later, we left Gaza, and I remember feeling, as we all did, that our mission had been completed, but we as a unit were very much incomplete. We'd lost one of our own. And I always remember Gilad. So I'm happy to share his story. He was apparently a very quiet man, but one who, despite being quiet, commanded the respect and the love of his fellow soldiers and of those that he commanded. And I think it's important to remember, and I'm happy to share with you, that Gilad Fisher, a man called Gilad Fisher, was here, and he defended Israel, and sadly he gave his life in 2004. The second soldier I'd like to remember is Benny Avraham. Benny is someone that I never met, but I got to know his family quite well. Benny grew up in central Israel. He was named after his uncle, Binyamin Avraham, who was killed in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. He was drafted into the engineering corps and became a commander, and he played a role in the evacuation of southern Lebanon in summer of 2000. He was then remained on the Lebanese border, patrolling the border, the newly demarked border after Israel pulled out of southern Lebanon. And in September 2000, he was on a routine patrol with two of his friends, and a rocket was launched at his patrol vehicle by Hezbollah terrorists who were disguised as UN peacekeeping soldiers. His vehicle was hit, and Hezbollah terrorists then crossed the border and kidnapped Benny and his two friends, Omar Suad and Adi Avitan. Benny's father then became the sort of leader, de facto leader of the campaign to bring Benny and his two friends home. Chaim traveled the world, speaking to anybody and everybody, to politicians, to diplomats, to Jewish communities, to put pressure on any organization that had any influence to help bring his son home. I, at the time, was working for FZY here in London, and we took that campaign to heart. We realized that people like Benny were doing all they could for the Jewish state and the Jewish people, and it was our duty to help Benny and to help his family. And we brought Benny's father, Chaim, and his mum, Edna, over to London, and I remember accompanying them to meetings at the Foreign Office with Jewish community leaders, with Amnesty International, who, by the way, made it very clear they really couldn't care less about Benny. And I stayed in touch with Chaim, with Benny's father, for many years. And in FZY, we launched a campaign, and we spearheaded a campaign. We ran half marathons to raise money for Chaim to continue the campaign. We stood outside kosher shops in northwest London with collection tins, where we did everything that we could to try and help the campaign. Sadly, in 2004, Benny's body was brought home. Israel's government made a deal with Hezbollah, released several hundred Hezbollah prisoners in return for the bodies of Benny and his two friends. And at the time, at the kind of close of the campaign, after Benny was buried back in Israel, Chaim publicly thanked a number of people, a number of organizations, obviously the Israeli government, a whole number of individuals, and he thanked a number of organizations, including FZY, which was a point of real pride. And I think it also sent a message. I kept in touch with Chaim for many years, in fact, until he died about 8-9 years ago. And he was always adamant about the importance of Jewish unity, of Jewish people looking after one another. And by mentioning FZY publicly, he'd recognized that it's the responsibility of everybody, whether we're thousands of miles away or whether we're in Israel, responsibility to look out for one another and to help one another. And for me, that's an important message that I've taken, and I think hopefully we can all take today. We may be thousands of miles away. We may not be in Israel. It may be a different atmosphere here, but there's always something that can be done. And whether that's supporting the families of the bereaved, whether that's supporting organizations that help soldiers who have been wounded, both physically and mentally, there's always plenty to be done. So Benny is someone that I always remember today. And I'd like to just finish with an extract, I think, from a poem that a lot of you will probably be familiar with. It's The Silver Platter by Natan Alterman. Natan Alterman was a prominent writer around the time of the Declaration of Independence, and he wrote this on the eve of the Declaration of Israel's independence. And he understood almost kind of prophetically that with the declaration of a Jewish state, there would be a war that would extract a very heavy price. And so he wrote this poem, The Silver Platter, in which he depicts two young beleaguered warriors who appear before the people of Israel. And I'll read just a couple of lines. He says, "Through wondering tears, the people, i.e. the people of Israel, stare. They ask, 'Who are you?' the silent two, and they reply, 'We're the silver platter upon which the Jewish state was served to you.'" And unfortunately, I think the message of the silver platter is just as relevant today as it was in 1947. The Jewish state comes at a price, and people like Gidad Fisher, like Benny Avraham, people like the 59 soldiers whose names have been added to the list of the fallen in the last year, they're also part of the silver platter. And I can only end by saluting, by thanking all of those who have given everything. And of course, the hope and the prayer that no more names will be added to the list of the fallen in this coming year and in years to come. And thank you very much for letting me share my thoughts and two people who are at the forefront of my mind for this coming day.
Thank you very much. It's extremely important and extremely moving to listen to you. Thank you very much, Dan. And we share your prayers. I remember very much the campaign to bring Benny Avraham back. Wish you strength and are with you in your thoughts. It's extremely important for us to be able to hear you. Thank you. Thank you. I noticed that Toby Green also put another link to Israel's national ceremony in the chat. We encourage people to join one or other of the possibilities of the memorial service now online. And a very big thank you to you, Dan, and our thoughts will be with you and many others during tonight and tomorrow. Thank you. If you can unscreen share, and people can now go to the different one, whichever of the links that they wish to. Thank you. So I think we're going to go to, people should choose where they go and click on whichever link, and we'll then be closing this this link. Thank you.